The morning of September 19th, 1944 arrived grey and cold across the fields of eastern France. Thick fog blanketed the countryside near Arracourt, reducing visibility to mere yards. Inside the turret of a brand-new Panther Ausf G, Oberfeldwebel Klaus Hartmann peered through his periscope into the white nothingness. His breath formed small clouds in the chill air as he scanned for movement, for shapes, for anything that might betray American positions ahead. Hartmann's Panther was part of the 113th Panzer Brigade, fresh from German factories with crews equally new to combat. They'd been told their mission was simple: drive west, smash through the American bridgehead at Arracourt, link up with friendly forces at Lunéville. The Panthers would make it easy. After all, their frontal armor was nearly impervious. American Shermans couldn't touch them. Not from the front, not at any range that mattered. Every tactical briefing had emphasized this. The Panthers' sloped glacis plate, its gun mantlet, its side armor, all designed to shrug off American shells like rain off steel. What Hartmann and his crew didn't know, what no one in the 5th Panzer Army knew, was that 600 yards ahead, dug into hull-down positions along a low ridge, Sherman tanks of the 37th Tank Battalion waited with something new loaded in their breeches. 6 rounds per tank, M93 high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition, tungsten cord penetrators capable of punching through 160mm of armor at combat ranges, rounds that would shatter everything German tankers believed about their invulnerability. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The story of how those tungsten shells ended up in those Sherman turrets and what happened when they met Panther armor that morning reveals one of the war's least known technological turning points, a moment when American industrial science, material scarcity, and battlefield desperation collided to produce a weapon that German intelligence never saw coming. To understand that September morning near Arracourt, we must first go back to where this weapon was born, not to the battlefields of France, but to the proving grounds and laboratories of the United States, where engineers raced against time to solve what appeared to be an unsolvable problem. By early 1944, American tankers in Europe faced a cruel arithmetic. The M4 Sherman, reliable and mechanically sound, was being outclassed by Germany's newest armor. The standard 75mm gun that armed most Shermans couldn't penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at any practical combat range. Not at 1,000 yards, not at 500 yards, not even at point-blank range, where the sloped glacis plate deflected American shells skyward like skipping stones off water. The solution seemed obvious: upgrade to the new 76mm gun with its higher velocity and better armor penetration. The first M4 Shermans, armed with 76mm guns, rolled off production lines in January 1944. Tanks began arriving in Britain that April, but higher-level commanders hesitated. The 75 had served adequately against earlier German tanks, and it fired a superior high-explosive round for infantry support. More importantly, logistics officers worried about supplying 2 different types of ammunition to mixed tank battalions. Not a single 76mm Sherman landed in Normandy on D-Day. Even attempts to interest General Patton's Third Army fell flat. On June 12, 1944, a report noted that all of the commanders were reluctant to see the 76 take the place of the 75 in any quantity. The belief persisted that the 75 could handle German armor as it had handled Tigers in Tunisia. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Then came the fighting in the hedgerows. American tank units encountered not the expected Panzer IVs, but Panthers, lots of them. Long-barreled 75mm guns, thickly sloped armor with an effective frontal thickness approaching 140mm, mobility nearly matching the Sherman, and a gun that could destroy a Sherman from over a mile away while American return fire bounced harmlessly off Panther hulls. The reports reaching Eisenhower's headquarters grew increasingly desperate. Sherman crews watched their rounds spark off Panther armor at ranges where the German gun could kill with impunity. The mathematics were brutal. It typically required 5 Shermans to destroy a single Panther, and 4 of those 5 would burn. Crew morale plummeted as tankers calculated their odds and found them wanting. On July 2nd, Eisenhower relayed complaints to Ordnance. On July 12th, a board convened to determine what weapons could defeat the Panther frontally. The results were sobering. None of the standard American weapons could penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at normal combat ranges. The 3-inch gun on the M10 tank destroyer could only penetrate the gun mantlet from 200 yards out. Everything else simply failed. Suddenly, those 76mm Shermans sitting idle in Britain became desperately wanted. General Bradley of First Army ordered as many sent to France as possible for Operation Cobra. 102 M4A 176 tanks arrived and became key to the operation, marking their combat debut on July 25, 1944. The longer gun provided better velocity and penetration than the old 75. At last, American tankers had a weapon that might level the playing field. Except it didn't. Not really. The 76mm gun, even with standard armor-piercing ammunition, still couldn't penetrate a Panther's glacis plate or frontal hull at combat ranges. Crews firing M62, a 1 armor-piercing rounds watched them bounce off Panther armor just as the 75mm shells had. When Eisenhower heard about this, his frustration boiled over. "You mean our 76 won't knock these Panthers out?" he reportedly exploded. "Why? I thought it was going to be the wonder gun of the war. Why is it that I'm always last to hear about this stuff? Ordnance told me this 76 would take care of anything the Germans had. Now I find you can't knock out a damn thing with it. The gun wasn't the problem. The ammunition was." While Eisenhower fumed in France, engineers at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland had been working on a solution since early 1944. The breakthrough came from studying captured German Panzer Granate 40 ammunition, specialized tungsten-cored anti-tank rounds used by German forces. The concept was elegant. Instead of relying on sheer mass to punch through armor, use density and velocity, make the penetrator smaller, harder, and faster. The result was the M93 high-velocity armor-piercing round. The projectile featured a tungsten carbide core, one of the hardest substances known to man, surrounded by a lightweight aluminum alloy body and steel outer jacket. The aluminum ballistic cap fell away after leaving the barrel, allowing the dense tungsten penetrator to strike armor at velocities exceeding 3,000 feet per second. According to testing data, the M93 could penetrate approximately 4 inches of homogeneous armor plate at 1,000 yards, sufficient to defeat a Panther's frontal armor at combat ranges. There was just one enormous problem: tungsten. China supplied most of the world's tungsten ore, and even with American production ramping up, there was never enough. Every M93 round required nearly a kilogram of tungsten carbide, and tungsten was needed everywhere: in cutting tools for machining aircraft engines and tank parts, in armor plate hardening, in electrical contacts, in dozens of industrial applications critical to war production. The competition for this scarce metal was fierce. The Army established a priority system. Tank destroyer units received first allocation since destroying enemy armor was their primary mission. Sherman tank battalions got whatever remained, which wasn't much. By late summer 1944, only a trickle of M93 rounds reached Europe. Production targets proved wildly optimistic. The original goal of 43,000 rounds per month for 1944 was quickly abandoned. Even the more modest rate of 10,000 per month wasn't reached until November. The first 1,000 rounds of 76mm T4 ammunition, the developmental designation for what would become M93, were produced in July 1944 and shipped by air to Europe in time for testing at Isigny. The portion that remained after testing was issued to troops. A second shipment of 1,000 3-inch T4 rounds for M10 tank destroyers followed in August. After that, everything came by normal surface shipping, which took approximately 10 weeks from the United States to the European theatre. Tank crews that did receive M93 rounds were issued just a handful, 4 rounds, sometimes 6, never more. They received strict orders. HVAP is for Panthers and Tigers only. No exceptions. Save these precious rounds for when it mattered most. Every round was marked with bright tape to distinguish it from standard ammunition. Gunners practiced loading them, learned their slightly different ballistics, memorized the proper aim points. Across the Atlantic, German tankers prepared for their own offensive. By mid-September 1944, the 5th Panzer Army had assembled for a major counterattack in Lorraine. The objective was ambitious: recapture Lunéville, eliminate the American bridgehead over the Moselle River at Dieulouard, and blunt General Patton's Third Army advance toward the German border. The attack force included the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades, equipped with brand new Panther tanks straight from German factories. The crews were young, eager, but inexperienced. Many had only basic training on the Panther. Few had seen actual combat, but they'd been thoroughly briefed on their tank's capabilities. The Panther was superior to any American tank. Its frontal armor was virtually impenetrable. Its 75mm gun could destroy Shermans at ranges where return fire was impossible. German tactical doctrine emphasized this advantage. Panthers would dominate through superior firepower and protection, allowing smaller forces to achieve disproportionate effects. What German intelligence failed to anticipate was American tungsten allocation priorities. What ordnance experts underestimated was Allied materials science capabilities. What tactical commanders never considered was that a seemingly modest improvement in American ammunition could transform the 76mm Sherman into a Panther killer. Defending the Arracourt sector was Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division under Colonel Bruce C. Clark. His force was under strength. Task Force Hunter, amounting to 1/3 of the Combat Command's strength, had been detailed the previous day to aid the fight for Lunéville. Clark's remaining units formed a thinly held salient around Arracourt. The 37th Tank Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams formed the core of Clark's armor strength. Abrams' tankers knew the odds they faced. They'd seen what Panthers could do in earlier engagements. They knew the standard 75 and even the new 76 had limited effectiveness against frontal armor. But now, nestled among the familiar shells in their ammunition racks, were those 6 marked rounds, 6 tungsten cord penetrators that could change everything. The crews didn't fully believe it yet. After weeks of watching their shells bounce off German heavy armor, they'd learned to be skeptical of miracle weapons. The morning of September 19th brought that thick fog Hartmann encountered in his Panther. Visibility dropped to 50 yards or less. German formations advanced in column, unable to see more than a few tank lengths ahead. The 113th Panzer Brigade pushed west toward Arracourt, Panthers rolling through the mist in a tight formation dictated by the reduced visibility. Their crews couldn't see the American positions, couldn't see the dug-in Shermans waiting along the ridge, couldn't see the tungsten cord shells loaded in 76mm breeches. At about 7 in the morning, Captain William Dwight, liaison officer between Combat Command A and the 37th Tank Battalion, spotted the German advance near Moncourt while driving his jeep. He immediately returned to Clark's headquarters to report. German tanks, multiple columns, moving fast. Clark realized how perilous his situation was. If the Panthers flanked the thin American line, they could overrun Combat Command A headquarters, less than 2 kilometers from the German approach. Clark ordered Dwight to take a platoon of M18 Hellcat tank destroyers and establish a blocking position on Hill 246, approximately 800 yards from Arracourt-La Petite. It was 7:45 when Dwight and 4 tank destroyers under Lieutenant Edwin Leiper reached the hill's summit. No sooner had the crews assumed firing positions than they saw German tanks emerging from the woods at the hill's base. The lead tank destroyer, commanded by Sergeant Stacy, opened fire. The first shot struck a Panther dead center. A second followed immediately. Another kill. Then a third. German tank hit Stacy's Hellcat, causing injuries to the crew, though the vehicle could still move under its own power back to Arracourt. More Panthers appeared. Dwight's small force had slowed but not stopped the German advance. Back at Combat Command A headquarters, Colonel Clark watched German tanks approaching through the fog. He needed more firepower immediately. Captain Jimmy Leach and B Company of the 37th Tank Battalion were at Chambray, several miles away. Clark radioed for Leach to report to Arracourt immediately. Believing the message routine, Leach preceded his company. arriving to find an exasperated Clark, who met him with, "Where the hell is your company?" Division artillery was already engaging 20 or 25 German tanks, pushing toward American positions. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Leach's company arrived piecemeal, tanks rolling into position as they reached the battlefield. 1st Platoon under 2nd Lieutenant Raymond Marston took positions near the Arracourt-Rechicourt road. Through breaks in the fog, Marston's gunners could see the vague silhouettes of Panthers advancing. The German tanks loomed huge in the mist, their long guns sweeping left and right as they searched for targets. The Americans held their fire, waited for the range to close, waited until they could be certain of their shots. At 75 yards, the 1st Sherman fired. Not standard armor-piercing, not high-explosive, M93 HVAP, the tungsten cord round screamed downrange at over 3,000 feet per second. It struck the lead Panther's gun mantlet with a bright flash. The tungsten penetrator punched through the armor that German crews had been taught was impenetrable from the front. Inside the Panther, the penetrator kept going, slicing through the fighting compartment, igniting ammunition. The turret lifted slightly from the internal explosion, then settled sideways as flames poured from every hatch. The German tankers in the following Panthers couldn't process what they'd just witnessed. Their doctrine said this was impossible. American 76mm guns couldn't penetrate Panther mantlets at 75 yards. They'd been briefed on this, trained on this. Their entire tactical approach depended on frontal invulnerability, but the burning wreck ahead proved otherwise. A second Panther emerged from the fog, another HVAP round, another penetration, another explosion. The German advance faltered. Crews who moments before had confidence in their armor's protection suddenly faced an enemy that could kill them frontally at close range. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. German commanders radioed frantically, "The Americans have new ammunition. They can penetrate our armor." Throughout the morning, similar scenes played out across the Arracourt sector. Sherm and crews, emboldened by their new ammunition, held their fire until German tanks closed to effective range. The fog that had blinded both sides now worked to American advantage. Panthers blundered into ambushes at ranges where HVAP proved devastatingly effective. At those distances, the tungsten penetrators struck with enough velocity and at sufficiently perpendicular angles to punch through mantlets, turret joints, even upper hull armor if the shot was perfect. Major William Hunter, the 37th Tank Battalion's executive officer, assembled a combined force from A and B companies. They wheeled south through Rechicourt, catching German formations in the flank. 9 Panthers destroyed with the loss of only 3 Shermans. The American tankers could hardly believe their own success. For months, they'd fought at a severe disadvantage against German heavy armor. Now, with just 6 tungsten rounds per tank, they were winning engagements that should have been impossible. The German crews experienced something far worse than physical defeat. They faced the collapse of everything their training had taught them. The Panther wasn't invincible. American guns could penetrate frontally. Their technological superiority, so carefully cultivated by German propaganda and tactical doctrine, had evaporated in a single morning's fighting. Young crews that had rolled into battle with confidence now hesitated, uncertain whether their armor would protect them. Hartmann's Panther, part of the column advancing toward Arracourt, never reached its objective. In the chaos of the fog and the American counterattack, his crew found themselves isolated, cut off from supporting units. They could hear explosions in the mist, could see the orange glow of burning Panthers. The radio crackled with confused reports of American tanks that could destroy Panthers frontally. Hartmann ordered his driver to pull back, to find other German units, to regroup. They made it perhaps 300 yards before an American Sherman appeared through the fog at close range. Hartmann's gunner traversed quickly, bringing the long 75mm gun to bear, but the Sherman fired first. The tungsten cord round struck Hartmann's Panther on the gun mantlet, that supposedly impenetrable shield around the gun mounting. The penetrator punched through. Inside the turret, the tungsten core continued its deadly path, striking the breech of Hartmann's gun, Then the ammunition stored in the sponson behind the gunner's position. The explosion inside Hartmann's Panther was instantaneous. The tungsten penetrator had done its work with ruthless efficiency. Hartmann never knew what hit him. His gunner, his loader, all dead before they could register what happened. The driver and radio operator in the forward hull had seconds longer, enough time to feel the heat building behind them, enough time to try the hatches before the ammunition cooked off completely. Outside, the Sherman crew watched the Panther burn. They'd used one of their 6 precious HVAP rounds. 5 remained. The gunner carefully marked which shells were tungsten cored, making sure everyone in the crew knew exactly which rounds they were. No one wanted to waste these miracle weapons on soft targets or at impossible ranges. They were for Panthers, for Tigers, for the moments when American lives depended on punching through German heavy armor. By mid-afternoon on September 19th, the fog began lifting. American P-47 Thunderbolts from XIX Tactical Air Command arrived over the battlefield, their pilots finally able to see targets through breaks in the weather. They dove on German formations, still trying to organize their assault, rockets and bombs falling on Panthers caught in the open without proper air defense or infantry support. The combination of HVAP-equipped Shermans on the ground and aerial attacks from above proved devastating. When the first day's fighting ended, the results shocked both sides. The 113th Panzer Brigade had been mauled, multiple Panthers destroyed, more damaged, crews shaken by the unexpected vulnerability of their supposedly invincible tanks. The Americans had lost tanks too, but far fewer than the pre-HVAP mathematics would have predicted. Captain Leach's B Company reported losing just 3 Shermans in their engagement, while inflicting heavy casualties on German armor. The fighting continued for days. German commanders, unwilling to believe their initial reports, threw more Panthers into battle. The 111th Panzer Brigade and elements of the 11th Panzer Division launched repeated attacks between September 20th and September 25th. Each time, they encountered the same lethal combination: American tanks in well-chosen defensive positions, artillery support that could mass fire on German approach routes, air attacks whenever weather permitted, and those tungsten-cored shells that turned frontal engagements from German advantages into even fights. On September 22nd, Lieutenant Colonel Abrams led the 37th Tank Battalion in an assault to recapture the town of Uvalise. Company A's Captain William Spencer led 7 tanks against 22 German tanks on the hill at Les Trois Croix. The tungsten ammunition gave Spencer's outnumbered force the confidence to engage. His gunners knew that their first shot could kill, that they didn't need to maneuver desperately for flank shots while German guns hammered them from the front. They could fight back effectively. The psychological transformation within American tank units was remarkable. Crews that had begun the Normandy campaign terrified of Panthers now engaged them with professional competence. The knowledge that HVAP rounds could penetrate frontally changed everything about how Sherman crews fought. They still used proper tactics, still sought advantageous positions, still called for artillery and air support. But they no longer felt helpless against German heavy armor. For German tankers, the experience was precisely the opposite. Every tactical briefing, every training session, every propaganda message had emphasized Panther superiority. Now that certainty had evaporated. Crews advancing toward American positions couldn't know if the Shermans ahead carried standard ammunition or those devastating tungsten penetrators. The doubt alone affected their fighting. Hesitation replaced aggression. Caution replaced confidence. By September 29th, when the Battle of Arracourt finally ended, the statistics told a brutal story. Of the 262 tanks and assault guns deployed by German units, 86 were destroyed, 114 damaged or broken down, and only 62 remained operational. Combat Command A, which bore the brunt of the fighting, lost 25 tanks and 7 tank destroyers. The 4th Armoured Division as a whole lost 41 M4 medium tanks and 7 M5A1 light tanks during September, with casualties of 225 killed and 648 wounded. The kill ratio was better than 3-1 in favour of the Americans. Against supposedly superior German armour, with supposedly inferior American tanks. The difference, more than any other single factor, was those 6 tungsten cord rounds per Sherman. Not enough to waste, just enough to matter when it counted most. The broader implications took time to fully register. Arracourt had been a textbook defensive victory, utilizing terrain, combined arms, and superior American logistics. But the tungsten ammunition had provided the essential foundation. Without HVAP, even the best tactics might not have prevented German Panthers from achieving breakthrough. With HVAP, American tankers could contest German armor frontally, negating the Panthers' primary advantage. The lessons learned at Arracourt spread throughout the European theatre. Tank crews that received HVAP rounds trained intensively on their use. Gunners practiced identifying the proper engagement ranges. Loaders memorized which rounds were tungsten cord. Commanders developed tactics built around maximizing HVAP effectiveness while conserving the scarce ammunition. But production remained limited. Through September, October, and November of 1944, HVAP rounds trickled to frontline units in insufficient quantities. Tank destroyer battalions received priority allocation. Sherman battalions got whatever remained. Crews counted their tungsten rounds carefully, knowing each one might mean the difference between killing a Panther or dying to one. When Germany launched its desperate counteroffensive in the Ardennes that December, American tankers carried that knowledge into the Battle of the Bulge. The German attack on December 16th caught American forces by surprise, hitting a weakly held sector with overwhelming force. Panzer columns, spearheaded by Tigers and Panthers, drove deep into American positions, seeking to reach the Meuse River and split Allied forces. In the chaotic first days, American tank units fought desperate delaying actions. Individual Sherman platoons faced entire German panzer battalions. The HVAP ammunition that had transformed summer battles in Lorraine now served as crucial equalizer in winter crisis. The rounds gave American crews hope, even when outnumbered and surprised. They knew that if they could hold their ground long enough to get clean shots, their tungsten penetrators could kill Panthers frontally. The fighting around Bastogne provided dramatic demonstration of how thoroughly HVAP had altered the tactical balance. American tankers, though outnumbered and fighting from hasty positions, achieved kill ratios that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. Units that received adequate HVAP supplies reported Panther kills at ranges and angles that previously would have resulted in American losses. The Germans, meanwhile, had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They'd gambled their last operational reserves on the Ardennes offensive, assuming that Panther superiority would carry the day, as it had in earlier fighting. But the Americans they faced in December 1944 were not the Americans of June. These crews had experience, they had training, and, critically, they had enough HVAP ammunition to fight back effectively. German commanders noted the change with alarm. Reports filtered back about American ammunition that could penetrate Panther frontal armor consistently. Intelligence officers scrambled to determine what had changed. Some correctly identified tungsten cord projectiles. Others assumed the Americans had deployed new guns. Few grasped the full scope of how American materials science and industrial capacity had undermined German technological advantages. By late December, as the German offensive momentum stalled against stiffening resistance, American armored counterattacks began compressing the salient. Tank battles during this phase saw HVAP employed with the confidence and skill that months of combat experience had developed. American gunners knew precisely where to aim. They understood the ammunition's ballistic characteristics instinctively, and they possessed sufficient quantities to engage multiple targets per engagement. Army operational analysis conducted after the Bulge determined that Sherman tanks achieved approximately 1.8 kills for every loss against Panthers during the Ardennes fighting, a ratio that represented complete reversal of early Normandy results. This dramatic improvement stemmed primarily from HVAP's ability to defeat Panther frontal armor consistently, though improved American tactical proficiency and German strategic desperation also contributed. By mid-January 1945, German forces withdrew from the Ardennes salient, leaving behind hundreds of destroyed or abandoned tanks that German industry could never replace. American losses had been substantial. Over 700 Sherman tanks destroyed or damaged during the campaign, but American production easily replaced these losses while German armor reserves were effectively exhausted. The Battle of the Bulge had consumed Germany's last operational reserve of panzer forces, losses made catastrophically worse by HVAP ammunition's effectiveness. The strategic impact extended beyond individual battles. German tactical doctrine before HVAP's introduction had emphasized aggressive use of heavy tanks to achieve local superiority, conduct counterattacks, and stabilize defensive lines. This doctrine assumed Panthers and Tigers could dominate American Shermans in direct combat, allowing smaller German forces to achieve disproportionate effects. HVAP's introduction invalidated this assumption entirely. German commanders were forced to husband their dwindling armor more carefully, accepting defensive postures that surrendered initiative to Allied forces. Panthers that once advanced confidently now held back, seeking concealment and long-range engagements where tungsten penetrators might be less effective. But this defensive mindset further eroded German operational flexibility at precisely the moment when aggressive maneuver might have disrupted Allied plans. The final months of the European War saw HVAP ammunition used routinely in combat operations, from the Rhine crossings through the final campaigns in central Germany. By this late stage, German armor had become increasingly scarce, with many panzer units reduced to cadre strength or disbanded entirely. When Panthers or Tigers did appear, American gunners engaged them with HVAP rounds almost casually, the desperate intensity of earlier encounters replaced by professional competence. The psychological journey American tankers experienced between June 1944 and April 1945 reflected more than adaptation to combat. It revealed the specific contribution of one crucial technical innovation. Crews that had begun the Normandy campaign terrified of Panthers ended the war confident they could defeat any German armor they encountered. That transformation rested on knowing their guns could kill German heavy tanks frontally. Post-war analysis by military historians and weapons experts consistently identified HVAP ammunition among the most significant tactical innovations of the Western Front campaign. Studies published by the United States Army Armor School at Fort Knox concluded that the introduction of effective anti-tank ammunition for the 76mm Sherman gun eliminated what had been a decisive German advantage. American armor could fulfill its operational roles without prohibitive casualties. The transformation occurred not through radical redesign of American tanks, which would have required years, but through clever application of materials science to existing weapons, precisely the kind of innovation that industrial democracies could accomplish more effectively than authoritarian regimes. The Germans had superior individual tank designs, but they lacked the industrial capacity to produce them in sufficient numbers, the materials to maintain quality as the war progressed, and the scientific infrastructure to counter Allied innovations. What the Germans never expected was that a seemingly modest improvement in American ammunition would transform the 76mm Sherman into a Panther killer. Their intelligence services failed to anticipate American tungsten allocation priorities. Their ordnance experts underestimated Allied materials science capabilities. Their tactical commanders paid in blood for assumptions that proved catastrophically wrong. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, who commanded the 37th Tank Battalion at Arracourt, went on to become Army Chief of Staff. The M1 Abrams tank would bear his name decades later. Its gun, its ammunition, and its doctrine all traced lineage back to lessons learned in those foggy fields near Arracourt. Mobility, combined arms, and the right ammunition for the job. The principles that allowed outnumbered Shermans to defeat Panthers in September 1944 remained relevant for generations. For the survivors of Arracourt and the Bulge, vindication came with bittersweet feelings. They knew what difference those 6 tungsten rounds per tank had made. They could calculate what more widespread supply might have accomplished months earlier in France. How many crews might have survived if HVAP had been available in June instead of September? How many Panthers might have been stopped before breaking through American lines? But they also understood the broader truth. Wars are won not just by superior weapons, but by the industrial capacity to produce them, the logistics to deliver them, and the training to employ them effectively. The United States had demonstrated all three. German engineering had produced the Panther, a masterpiece of tank design. American engineering had produced the M93 HVAP round, a masterpiece of applied materials science. And American industry had produced it in sufficient quantities to matter. The tungsten cord penetrator, measuring less than 3 feet in length and weighing just over 15 pounds, had altered the course of armoured warfare in ways that entire divisions could not. Sometimes wars turn not on grand strategies or decisive battles, but on small innovations that arrive at exactly the right moment. The M93 HVAP round was such an innovation. It didn't make the Sherman the best tank in the world, but it gave American crews something far more important: the power to fight back on equal terms. When the war in Europe ended in May 1945, American tank crews could look back on their journey from the hedgerows of Normandy to the heart of Germany with pride earned through bitter experience. They'd learned to fight Panthers and Tigers not by avoiding them or overwhelming them with numbers alone, but by developing tactics and ammunition that could defeat German armour in direct combat. The 6 tungsten rounds that had seemed like so little in September 1944 had proven to be exactly enough. For German tankers who survived the war, the memory of that morning near Arracourt remained vivid. The moment when American shells that should have bounced off instead punched through. The realization that their invulnerability was an illusion. The knowledge that German technological superiority had met American industrial capacity and lost. Those who served in the 113th Panzer Brigade remembered watching their brand-new Panthers burn in the French mud, destroyed by supposedly inferior American tanks firing ammunition German intelligence never saw coming. The Battle of Arracourt entered military textbooks as an example of successful mobile defense, but for those who fought there, it represented something more fundamental. The moment when American determination, industrial science, and 6 tungsten cord shells per tank rewrote the rules of armoured warfare. German tankers never expected America's 76mm Shermans to punch through frontal armour at 1,000 yards. That miscalculation, replicated across hundreds of engagements from Lorraine to the Ardennes to the Rhine, helped seal Germany's fate in the West. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.